What is going on, everybody? So, the Resident Evil 4 remake, Separate Ways DLC, just recently came out. I finished it, loved it, and I think it's a total masterpiece and a perfect homage to the original Separate Ways in the original game. But today isn't about Resident Evil 4 remake or even the original Resident Evil 4. As of recent, Resident Evil 2 Remake has been announced as the best-selling Resident Evil game in the series to date.
But I just can't resist then to talk about Resident Evil 2 Remake and how, to me, it's a perfect reimagining of the survival horror classic, and then some. And I'm surprised that I'm saying that, because to me, I saw the remake as a very ambitious project and something that a lot of fans have been looking forward to for years. And well, something that couldn't have possibly turned out to be better than the original, right? Well guys, I'm here to say that it is better than the original, if not a perfect reimagining of how Resident Evil 2 would have been if it came out in this generation with the same ambition and passion that Capcom had over 20 years ago. Let's start from the beginning. When it comes to making a good survival horror game, especially one that's taking on the identity of Resident Evil 2, you need to get one thing perfect: the atmosphere. Resident Evil 2, among any of the Resident Evil games, had the most iconic and memorable atmosphere. When you're recreating something so iconic as Resident Evil 2's beginning sequence with fire as if you're going into hell itself, the RPD station, the sewers, and Umbrella's lab, the first thought I would have is to not deviate from the original idea too much. But in the remake, the developers seemed to be fearless, so much so that in the first 10 minutes of the game, you started off at a location that was only seen in a cutscene from the original game. And before buying this game, I was hoping that I would start off as Claire in that restaurant, or anything else that took place during that cutscene. And just to show how confident they were, the developers let us start off at the gas station that we saw in a cutscene in the original. If that doesn't scream, hey, look what I can do, then I don't know what does. That already impressed me, and the game just started. That gas station had nothing to do with the actual story, and it was still very terrifying, and probably better than the original Resident Evil's introduction of a zombie. At that point, I just don't know what else to say. That alone should show you how good this game is. It took something that wasn't even featured in the original and made it better than the original's opening. But it doesn't stop from there. From the gas station, that's when you start to see Raccoon City, and the atmosphere in Raccoon City is captured perfectly. I'm pretty sure you can tell by now that I'm kind of a Resident Evil geek, and admittedly so I am, and embarrassingly so, more than you think. And so, staying on the topic of the game, the remake improves on the original in almost every aspect. Now, there are some enemies that are missing, I'll get to that later, but for the enemies that the game does have, their mobility, sound effects, patterns, aesthetics, and pretty much everything about these enemies have been improved upon from the original. The Licker can climb on the side of the walls, as well as having a more in-depth inability to see you, which makes the game a lot more intense when you spot one. But surprisingly, the Licker, in my opinion, is the most simple enemy in the game, yet it has all of those abilities. The most complicated enemy in the game is just the zombies. There are about 5 to 6 different types of male zombies and female zombies, all having their own particular way of moving, reacting, acting, and also having their own identifying types of growls or any other type of disturbing noises they would make to add to the atmosphere. And not only that, every time you shoot at a zombie, pieces of them fall off, like their face, legs, arms, fingers, everything. It just makes every zombie different from the other. And I could say without a doubt that these are among the best zombies I've ever seen in any video game. Their movements are so fluid and so obviously well crafted to make you feel like you're dealing with a different zombie every time you meet another one. And that's what the series has been missing. Not only are they detailed and unique from one another, but man, are they hard to kill. In hardcore, you would have to shoot a zombie about 13 times in the head just to finish them off. These zombies are no joke. But the number one scariest thing in this game would have to be Mr. X. The first time I ran into Mr. X, when he was lifting that helicopter above his head, I almost couldn't believe what I was looking at. I thought it was going to transition into a cutscene that would eventually bring me to safety. But of course, that's not how this game works. it puts you in a situation that forces you to put your shit together to desperately survive from. And Mr. X will pit you in those situations over and over again. There was a point in the game where I was just standing still for 10 minutes, just listening to him roam around the police station looking for me and wondering exactly where the heck he was, just so I can get that key card. Not having the ability to freely roam around and do whatever you want with the rules that were established from the beginning rattles your cage a surprising amount. Mr. X, as well as the zombies, has been improved upon a lot. In the original, you would be able to take him down and just not have to worry about him, but in the remake, when you shoot him 5 times in the head with a magnum, all he does is temporarily kneel to recover, and then he gets right back up about 15 seconds after to start pursuing you again. Mr. X, or the Tyrant, is probably scarier than Chris Walker in Outlast. Sure, Chris Walker makes a bunch of crazy noises and can rip off your head from your body, but Mr. X doesn't say anything. He just comes out of nowhere and just simply tries to kill you, as if it's another Wednesday for him, as if he's done it 100 times, and when you shoot him in the face with a shotgun, he just shakes it off. You have weapons, and he's still not going down. That's what upgrades him above Chris Walker status. The fact that it's deniable if he can even die. And besides the zombies, Tyrant, Lickers, there are some enemies missing from Resident Evil. In the original, you had those annoying spiders that would come out of nowhere to poison you. I feel like their only job was to poison you. And to be honest, they weren't scary at all. They were just there to poison you and to make the blue herb have a purpose. While in the remake, the blue herb has a purpose besides being an antidote for poison. Now the blue herb can give you more defense. So yeah, the spiders are missing, but I don't miss them. And besides, the spiders are replaced with the G babies, or the G embryo children, whatever you call them. And these guys can poison you, but most importantly, they are terrifying. The first time you see one, it's not that terrifying because you know he's there waiting, but when going back to where you came from in the sewers, you just see one sprout out of a sewer line and into the part of the sewer that you were about to run into. I doubt after seeing that anybody actually took a step forward. The first thing I did was turn directly around and back to where I came from. The only thought that comes into mind after seeing that would be, hell no. And so yes, there were changes from the original, but in my opinion, there were much needed improvements. Just like those plant creatures you meet in the Umbrella facility. Instead of just being a human-sized Little Shop of Horror plant, which you barely see in the original, ended up being some kind of humanoid, clicker-esque zombie hybrid that, for the most part, scared the bejesus out of me, at least for the first few times. And then I just avoided that area entirely. You know, after playing Resident Evil 2 Remake for about 30 hours, it's hard to tell which game is better, Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 2. Sure, Resident Evil 4 is most likely a better game, but in terms of being what you thought it would be, I feel like Resident Evil 2 Remake is probably the best Resident Evil game ever made, opposed to Resident Evil 4 just mixing up the formula a little too much, and instead trying to be the best game and just using the Resident Evil name, opposed to being the best Resident Evil game it could be. Because RE is known for being scary, challenging, and also cool to look at, and the developers did a fine job of perfecting it. And even though the director of Resident Evil Remake, Kazunori, never directed a Resident Evil game before, and was only present for Resident Evil 1, Outbreak, Outbreak 2, Code Veronica, and 5, he seemed to have captured the essence of the series perfectly from Resident Evil 2 and modernized it. Even Leon and Claire were better characterized in this game. They were realistically scared and anxious, as well as having good chemistry with each other and other characters, and that in any game is hard to do. Even though Leon and Ada weren't together for that long, it was actually saddening to see it end. That's how powerful the chemistry was in this game. Leon and Claire were basically just likable, good people that were trying to help others. The way Claire joked around with Sherry showed that likable personality, and I started the game with Claire first because, in my opinion, she's a very underrated character, and she's part of the Redfield family, but I actually found her character to be more likable than Leon's, just because she was more playful, positive, and emotional. Sure, Leon was emotional, but he was kind of the Boy Scout, the guy that always did the right thing no matter what, and doesn't see much bad in other people. They were still two very good characters, but the most important thing, which is differentiating one character from the other, really made their difference difference more prominent with their personalities portrayed. And Capcom and Kazunori did a great job in portraying how a realistic and modern Claire and Leon would be. And speaking of realistic, there are some touches to this game that I found funny, like instead of using a Windows 98 computer, Leon would use a laptop, and well, to have the new generation know what they're doing, instead of using a floppy disk like you would normally use in 1998, you would use a USB drive. That change alone made me feel really old. Like there's something I could show someone from this generation that could confuse them so much they wouldn't know what to do with it. That was just a little funny thing I noticed in the game, how they jumped the technology about 10 years just so kids could know what the heck they were doing. And lastly, because of all these reasons, the Resident Evil 2 remake successfully outdoes, surpasses, outpaces, and just downright perfects the original formula from its original predecessor. Resident Evil 2 Remake is something I didn't even know was possible. Somehow Capcom woke up and became the Capcom we always wanted them to be. And if you're a newcomer who's enjoyed games like Outlast, Alien Isolation, and The Last of Us, I can tell you without hesitation that you are going to eat Resident Evil 2 up. And yes, that's a tasteless pun, but trust me, when you play this game, you're gonna know why there's so many people obsessed with Resident Evil like me. It still doesn't explain why Paul W.S. Anderson is such a bad director, but for everything else, it shows exactly where survival horror came from and why Resident Evil is still king. And I'll leave you guys with that, and leave in the comments exactly what your favorite Resident Evil game was and what you thought about this one. Now see you guys next video. Have a good one.